This is an idea that you don't often hear regarding decolonizing yours and my worldview. That it's not a linear process, and it's not just about movement from the external, the system, that you and I could be free from this bondage, but rather it's a circular process of uncolonizing to decolonize or vice versa. If you imagine a rotonda, a circular pathway to return back to ourselves, this is what we're going to explore in this episode today. Are Filipinos truly bilingual? We use the same language at home but speak and love languages foreign to each other, together but separated. Kamusta? I'm Roanne, licensed psychotherapist, mom, immigrant twice, first-generation Pinoy raising my mixed Filipino-American children in America. I found that after visiting 500 Filipino homes, I continue to be a student of the culture. In this podcast, we would be seatmates in this beautiful cultural classroom. And by the way, did I tell you I need my kapeng barako straight from Batangas before each class? If you're interested in learning the deep intricacies of the Filipino culture, especially as it merged with American culture, talks about trauma-informed care, and deepening your Filipino relationships across generations, which includes my fave topic, Pinoy love languages, you're in the right place. This episode is brought to you by the Inner Child Playground course. If you want to uncolonize, to decolonize, and to let go a bit of that steam, that pressure, the burden to change the system, which we all hope can change for the better, start here. It's a place where your inner activist can get its much needed rest, play, and nurturing to better serve the world. Kamusta everyone? Thank you for being here. This is Roanne, your host for the Pinoy Love Language podcast. Some of you listening have reached out to me personally to schedule a consult and to let me know that you have been listening to my podcast. I so appreciate. It's such a delight to be in the same space, both for you to see me, but really more for me to see you. I thank you to those who are telling me that they have shared the podcast or that they listen to the podcast with their mom or their tita. Thank you so much. First, I want to say that the idea, the thought around this topic is something that is not common or not very popular. And so when you're listening and if you feel in your body or something is rebelling, you could take a break that is new, anything that is seem novel. If you are introduced with something new, you want to kind of like sniff that first or repel it. This is very human. And so let it be. Come back to this material when you're ready. And so this is an idea that is not popular because even many Filipino American psychologists and researchers speak about changing system. So to decolonize, the term DE means movement, removal, or separation from this process of being colonized, basically decolonizing one's mind. Now, the prefix on, UN, is a reversal of action. It's that state of being, of returning back to the original. So the proposal is that there are many pathways, and it's a more circular pathway. And my thought is leaning on uncolonizing to decolonize. What I want to bring to your attention is the theory that colonization is an influence. It's a great big influence in the Filipino culture. I often share that in my writings. But also that the Filipino have not been completely colonized. So check the episode prior to this. If you are studying an island let's say the motherland. But if you keep talking about simply the body of water that surrounds it, you're forgetting that the island is also influenced by its landform, it's the sky. Basically, there are many facets to its geographical location and its feature, and also the raw materials that are afforded because of its geographical location. My point is, if you're only looking at a cultural group based on one main variable, not that that's wrong, but that's simply a chapter in the book. And my intent for sharing this, my friends, is simply to share that there are other chapters in the book. And so you will be the judge of what's working out collectively or not. The problem with that one-way street to simply decolonize, to change the system, is that it's all about movement. And in many ways, that's a very westernized perspective. If you know history, the Vikings, Charlemagne, when there's a group of people in Europe and they did not agree with the king and what he's trying to impose as far as his religious belief, these people actually took a ship called the Mayflower. They're one of the first who occupied what we call now parts of the America. So in early human civilization, there's a lot of movement and conquering. It was the indigenous people who were still, because they were listening to nature, they were busy appeasing their God, while other groups, especially more in the European and also in China, have been progressing and looking into technology. And so whoever, that group of people, the Vikings, they were so keen into developing ships, and this is the reason why they were able to travel, unlike some tribal groups. So when you think about this westernized culture, there's a lot of movement, and the word decolonize is actually around movement. There is no intention to propose that we shouldn't move. But if that's all that we're doing and forgetting that we could also in our own space uncolonize, that we have the agency also to uncolonize our minds. If we are relying on systems to change so that we could uncolonize our minds, you and I, we will meet that with a lot of frustration and even anger. And we see that a lot collectively, that what's happening, because we cannot force people to move a certain way, and we cannot control systems and groups. When I was back in the Philippines, I've experienced during the attempt to oust two presidents, like being an activist. So I'm not saying that these types of movements are not appropriate, but there is a circular pathway, and the thought to decolonize, to change system, to change the self completely is not really aligned to the indigenous and the Eastern philosophy. For example, the teaching of the Tao or the Taoism, that the way out is in, or Mahatma Gandhi's be the change that you want to see in the world. Or in Tagalog, kung walang mababago sa loob, hindi magbabago ang labas. If you are interested in really honing your intuition, healing your inner child, when we say uncolonize, this is part of the process. My offering is this 30 days inner child playground, where you would do at least just 10 minutes a day, where it is a creative expression, whether you want to simply listen to your inner child, hone your intuition, or simply have a practice, especially if you are a healer, therapist, coach, or you're a mom or a dad. Check out the link in the show notes. I want to give a little bit more clarity about the uncolonized to decolonize. For example, if you had an abusive parent, when you get older, it will be our job to reparent ourselves. I mean, our anger may not be misplaced, but at a certain point, we cannot transform our parents to transform ourselves. Thought that change rely on something we cannot control, which is wanting to change the parent, creates anger and conflict. And it really underdevelops our muscle of resilience. And this is not all about being resilient to bad things that are happening. That's not what I'm saying. Anger is actually brought about when you are in a position where you feel helpless, when there is no option. The muscle of uncolonizing is actually coming from more the indigenous teaching, the Eastern philosophy of really changing oneself as you are believing that that is what would change the world. Now, that might sound so cliche. That's why my offering is not that it's the only way, but it's a circular way that we can do both. That you could be advocating what would change the system, because we do hope that change for the better. But while you're doing that, you're also doing your own internal work. To simply wait for the system to change, that's more of my concern as just a human being, as a therapist. I see this a lot where this whole system, the hope to change the system, permeates also in relationships, in our homes, where now we're trying to change our parents or we're trying to change our partner. This whole seeing things only from a system, but things are a system, but they're also micro and macro system. So I am just going to take a break. Thank you for listening. And when we come back, I'm going to attempt to share some tips on how we could call each other in and this whole circular pathway to our collective healing. Diyan ka lang. Thank you for hanging in there. So, talking about this circular pathway to our collective healing. And again, the intent of this episode is to provide another or an additional story. Whatever story you have, you can keep that. And actually, you don't even have to choose. Like I said, what you have is a chapter in a book. And we're just sort of collating chapters so that we could see wider. So the question stands, how could we encourage this collective healing? First of all, continue to support advocacy from the heart. I like it when I hear people say, I am for this. There is a dialogue with Mother Teresa, and when she was invited to go on a procession to be anti-Vietnam War, she said no. And she said, when you are for something, you could let me know. So even the changing of that language, before something rather than against something. So this is what I'm talking about when I see support advocacy from the heart. Next, let us clear our channels. No one is a master of this. I have my own practice as a therapist so that we're constantly clearing our channels by healing our wounded parts. So how you do this is you seek support, or in my world, it's therapy. I think therapy is great with that, with a good fit therapist. If you are considering that, there is a directory for Therapy Now, but I would also leave the link to set up a complimentary consult with me to see if we're a good fit. This is very important because I notice that we have some activists that are really forcing their way into ideas that I think are good for humankind, but they're almost like wounded and they're bleeding, and that is seeping into their work, and that leaves them so depleted and sometimes even angry. So clear your channels. This is our work all together. Now, this one, even more cliche, is to Be the change you want to see in the world. If you had no voice, okay, if you can't speak, how will you show up in the world that aligns to what you believe? Okay, sometimes we get tripped up with words and, that's how you say it politically correct, or that's a microaggression. Those things are very hard to contend with because now we have our own interpretation. So if you didn't have a voice, if all you had was action, how would you show up? Okay, so and align with that. Next, serve. I believe in this, like serving with very similar to what I just mentioned. Serving for your cause, serving for rather than against. And also be a friend. Nowadays, we need more eyeball interaction. I find that if you are on Facebook or social media, it almost seems like people are always fighting, and they might be. But when you gather around with people without these distraction, we are really inclined as social beings to try to see if we could find a common ground with the other person. So these are the things to decolonize, uncolonize, to uncolonize, decolonize. It's a circular pathway, my friends. It's a rotonda. There's many paths to it. One of the things to be mindful of, sometimes when you're listening to things that are over and over again as if it's the only path, then be wary because there's always multiple paths. So uncolonize to decolonize. Know that you have the agency. Trust that you can find your way back home rather than you have given your key to another person and now you're trying to get into their space so you could find your way back home because you think they have the key. But my friend, it's a reminder that you have it. You can find your way back home. And that's it for right now. Maraming salamat sa pakikinig at sa ulitin.